Welcome to Saving Europe. I'm the novelist and historian Henry Viner Brooks, and in this series we're following the lives and travels of two of history's unsung heroes. The decisive leadership shown by the 6th century monk Columbanus and the 20th century statesman Robert Schuman helped rescue Western civilization in two very different dark ages. So, joined by my two sons, I'm on a 4,000-mile, 12-country post-Brexit odyssey to find out if these men and these dark ages can teach us anything for today.
This time on Saving Europe, it's a tale of two cities. At Nantes, it's the turning of the tide for Columbanus, and further south at Poitiers, we not only visit the oldest Christian building in the Western world and one of the very earliest monasteries in the West, but we also meet a notable Roman convert called Hilary, who, like Martin of Tours and Benedict, helped save Europe. All this and more, this time on Saving Europe.
If you're finding this content helpful, then please return the favour by subscribing, perhaps sharing it with a friend, and also using the links to check out the book that accompanies this series.
So we begin our journey at the end of the Loire, where, under guard, Columbanus and his doughty Irish missionary band are awaiting extradition.
It's very strange that we ended up here at the Palace of Justice in Nantes, at the very at the end of the Loire. This was Columbanus's dark night of the soul, when incomprehensibly everything had gone wrong. The very thing that he had never imagined would happen had happened. He'd been kicked out of France and ended up in Nantes. I want to read you a letter that he wrote while he was here. Funnily enough, we arrived just now and we were pretty hungry ourselves, so we had just eaten. He had no food when he came. They had like 1 meal's worth, and they met a beggar, and the beggar said, "Can I have some food?" And they said, "Well, we've only got this." And he gave the beggar food they had, as Francis Assisi would do later, as Martin of Tours had done a century before, gives his last food away, gives away what's most valuable to him. And then two miracles happen. Two people are given directions from God to bring food to Columbanus. One of the ladies' names is Procula, and then another lady, Doda, sends him 200 measures of wheat, which is an enormous amount of food. And with that they eat, because they've been fasting for 3 days. At the palace, there's the bishop, there's Count Theudebald organising this extradition. They've not sent any food, but these dear women did. Columbanus at this point is heartbroken. Let me read you what he writes, a very hasty letter back to Atala in Luxor. He says, "I confess that I am broken. For a while I wished to help everyone, but they fought against me without a cause, and while I trusted everyone, they have driven me almost mad. I wanted to write you a tearful letter, but my grief is shut up within. The tears flow, but it is better to check the fountain, for it is unbecoming for a brave soldier to lament in the battle." He really pierces the soul as a man who's on the verge of a nervous collapse. He finishes the letter to Atala like this: "They come to tell me that the ship is ready. The end of my parchment also compels me to finish this letter. Love is not orderly. It is this which has made me confused. Farewell, dear hearts of mine. Pray for me that I might live in God." It's a very touching moment. It's something similar to what we saw back at Angray, that the real man, not just the pioneer, not just the single-hearted entrepreneur, if you like, spiritual entrepreneur. Here we see the man touched by the infirmities of others. So the next day he will get his stuff put into a ship, and the Bishop Sophronius will get it all sorted. But that's not the end of the story, not by a long shot.
We're going to leave Columbanus hanging there while we travel 200 kilometres southeast and 250 years back to the time of Hilary of Poitiers and Martin of Tours.
You know, when we're coming to Poitiers, Poitiers, you're coming somewhere very old. This is a medieval cathedral, but I can see elements here which predate it. It looks suspiciously Roman. Later on, we're going to go to the baptistry of John. It's just across the road, which is a place I've longed to come to ever since I saw Civilizations with Ken Clarke. And on it, we'll be able to see the rearrangement of ancient fragments. And it really speaks of people trying to make sense of a world that had fallen down really after the collapse of the empire, and how they repaired and how they built. So I'm really looking forward to that. If we want an example of Merovingian architecture, this is it. There are not many examples in France. This is one. It's amazing. So what's significant about the baptistry of St. John in Poitiers is it's incredibly early. So if you wanted to know, in that period as the Roman Empire is going down the pan, how they were building, what they were doing, come and look at this. They're taking elements that they must have just found lying around, Roman bits, and some of the carvings are really basic. So there's this idea that you want to model yourself on a Roman emperor, and yet you haven't quite got the skill. Something's been lost, the confidence has been lost, and yet the memory somehow remained, and you'll see them often showing themselves on their coinage, looking like Roman emperors with laurel wreaths around their heads.
And if you think this sort of scrapyard architecture is a tad shoddy, then remember this is one better than we were managing in Britain, as I discovered when visiting a lavish villa that had lain buried until the 19th century.
A lot of back and forth with archaeologists, historians, antiquarians over the centuries about the speed of the decline in different countries. One thing can be established through archaeology now is that in Britain we are the example in extremis compared to other parts of Europe. Here at Chedworth, Roman villa in Gloucestershire, looking at all these fantastic mosaics, it's hard to imagine that within one generation, when the Romans left, this place had become a pile of ruins. This whole site was built upon the fixity of the corn price, because the legions would buy grain at a fixed price. When that went, when the legions left, when Honorius said to the Britons, look to your own defences, that was it. The whole reason for the existence of these luxury villas out in the country, perhaps away from Cirencester, 9 miles to the north, it just ceased to function. Over the succeeding generations, the stone was robbed and taken to other villages to build churches and so on. But even by 600, people were just roasting their grain on these beautiful mosaic floors. You know, the outside we saw a toilet with running water down there. We wouldn't see the like of that until the Victorian era. It just goes to show how ephemeral what we call civilization is, and how quickly things, even in the age of revolution, where we want to tear everything down without a real view of what we've got, this could really make us think again about some of the blessings of modernity.
With that sober lesson in mind, let's now return to Poitiers to meet one of those thought leaders who helped shore up religious and civil culture when those with eyes to see understood that Roman civilization was in terminal decline.
So let me tell you about someone who is inextricably interwoven in French Christianity to Hilary, Poitiers. What he represents very early on, that person raised as a pagan who becomes a Christian. He's in the first generation when Christianity is a religio licita, a legal religion. His parents are pagans. He's raised as a pagan, but he rejects the Neoplatonism of his parents and embraces Christianity. His real bone is against the Arians. Now they are the dominant party at that time, ruling all of the Christian West and right the way across to Alexandria, Antioch, and all those places in the east. And this guy, Hilary, is called the Athanasius of the West. Him and Athanasius fought tooth and nail against one of those synthetic religions that made Jesus just to be a man and not fully God and fully man. But he marshalled all his polemic strength to write against them, and he got a couple of guys kicked out. Like there was a bishop and some of his supporters got him chucked out from round here. So let me read you a little bit of something that the classic introduction to his works by this guy Watson. He says this: "It was the misery and folly of the day that men endeavoured to promote the cause of God by human means and the favour of the world. Hilary asked bishops who believe in their office whether the apostles had secular support when with their preaching they converted the greater part of mankind. The church seeks for secular support and in so doing insults Christ by the implication that his support is insufficient. She in her turn holds out the threat of exile and prison," and of course Hilary himself was in prison, was exiled from here eventually. He did come back, but he was chucked out. Remember, if you've got the emperor's support, make the emperor an Arian Christian, you can have everyone else suppressed. It was her endurance of these that drew men to her church. Now she imposes her faith by violence. She craves for favours at the hand of her communicants. Once it was her consecration that she braved the threatening of persecutors. Bishops in exile spread the faith. Now it is she that exiles bishops. So the church, it is extraordinary. This is the second generation after it's a legal religion, and already a Christianity, a privileged state cult, is now persecuting dissenters. It's such a short time. And Hilary's really standing up for that. And we know so much about him because a friend of his who's a lawyer writes his life down within his own lifetime. Also, he encouraged Martin, the Hungarian soldier who stood up against the pagan Emperor Julian, to build legacies. So we love Hilary, we love being at the baptistry in Poitiers, so just thumbs up for him.
Thumbs up indeed. Civilization needs both standard bearers and pioneers. Hilary was an intellectual standard bearer with enough foresight to encourage pioneers like Martin. But Western civilization needed its defenders too, and it was near here that Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, defeated an Islamic army that had come to despoil Martin's monastery. 1,000 years later, as we've seen elsewhere, the French people despoiled a worldly church that had heeded none of Hilary's warnings against privilege. The baptistry was sold to a private citizen who used it as a warehouse. In the evening, we headed 5 miles up the River Clain to see Martin's first startup, and also to think more about what it really takes to preserve and build a civilization.
So yeah, this is Legouge or Legue, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, and we're just south of Poitiers after another hot drive. Yeah, see that? There's Martin giving away his coat. Well, it seems entirely appropriate to be in the oldest monastery in the Western world to do a little reading called Building on the Rubble, which is an excerpt from Saving Europe about that time. I'm going to start with a Reinhold Niebuhr quote from his book Irony of American History. He says, "Nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime, therefore we must be saved by hope. And nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history, therefore we must be saved by faith. And nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone, therefore we must be saved by love. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as it is from our own standpoint, therefore we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness." The theologian Karl Barth likened Martin Luther to a man in a dark bell tower steadying himself by grabbing the rope, then finding that he had actually grabbed the bell rope and woken up the whole countryside. And one of the constant surprises in studying those who shaped, dare I say, who saved Western civilization after the empire's collapse, is that they were never attempting to do any such thing. If anything, their legacy to us was a byproduct of them seeking to save themselves. The old adage about those who are so heavenly minded that they are no earthly good is well known. But what is less well known is that greater truth to which, as we shall see, we owe the existence of the Western culture as we know it. We saw in a previous chapter that the Irish were escaping the terror of an animist system that derived its philosophy from nature. Columbanus was part of a new generation that was seeking to live out, in the private and the public life, the law of love and of temperance, not just competition and grab, even when they seem necessary to survival. From now on, they would accept as a spiritual law never to put survival first, and also to train themselves to feel that the survival of their own nation or their own culture was not worth having unless it could be had on honourable terms. And that was a quote from C.S. Lewis. He says this: "Nothing is more likely to destroy a species or a nation than the determination to preserve it at all costs. Those who care for something else more than civilization are the only people by whom civilization is at all likely to be preserved. Those who want heaven most have served earth best. Those who love man less than God do most for man." This might appear to be a shocking assertion, but as we noted in chapter 2, the supposedly practical people of the age were of little use. The restless rich despoiled the material fabric of the civic structures and enslaved their fellow men for private gain, while the empire's mighty saviours like Justinian and Belisarius only served to destroy the very thing that they were trying to save with the power of the sword. Here is the enigma, and here begins our profound debt to the monastic founders of the West. Monasticism was not originally a Christian invention, but it had a mixture of pagan and Jewish roots from as far away as Mesopotamia. It is little wonder that it flourished in Egypt, where in earlier times the cults of Serapis, Mithras and Isis had found similar monastic expressions. Most ascetic movements paradoxically attract people of societal privilege. Even Buddha, his first 60 months, had 55 members from prominent families, and he himself was a prince. So likewise 75% of ascetic Catholic saints from 500 to 1500 were from the nobility. Indeed 20% or 22% from royalty. But the strong tendency toward asceticism was not universal. Even before 200 AD, the Carthaginian Tertullian would repulse the accusation of isolationism. These bells have been ringing for 1700 years. They shouldn't stop for us. He repulsed the accusation of isolationism by saying this: "We are not Brahmins or Indian fanatics who live naked in the woods or as recluses in exile from their fellow countrymen. We mix with you. We are one people with you." Through the written rule of Antony's successor, Pacmonius, a pattern for monastic life was disseminated west to the other founders like Basil, who modified it for what would become Byzantium. Then Cassian, who did the same for Gaul, where it was developed by men like Hilary of Poitiers and Martin of Tours, who originally founded the monastery here in 360. The story of Martin was fascinating. Here is Martin giving his coat to a beggar. It's very strange how these acts of sacrifice can form the beginnings of something. It's throughout Western Christian history, and probably beyond obviously, but it becomes life-defining almost, that you give up your most cherished things to find life. And as Jesus says, you want to find your life in this world, you will lose it. But if you lose it in this world, you will find it. I guess this is Bishop Martin later. He never wanted to become bishop. They literally had to trick him into it. It's amazing. It's the little people again. It's like the hobbits, an abbot, peaceable abbot. That's what it took eventually. We shall see this over and over again. It was the power of friendships and forgiveness that really made the difference, that really set the difference to transform the culture of war, fear, animosity, bigotry, hatreds, and to turn it round. It took far-sighted geniuses, just like it took a Hungarian soldier, Martin of Tours, to plant such culture-shaping engines right in the heart of France. We don't know what our actions will ever come to. I just think we have to do the best sometimes, and we have to be ahead of the curve. And sometimes that may look like you're way behind the curve.
And talking of people doing their best under difficult circumstances, let's now return to Nantes, where the man who gave away his last crust to a beggar is still awaiting extradition. These brave Irishmen who had witnessed so much humiliation and despair are now about to experience an unexpected turn of events. Columban, a 7th century biographer, says that they found a vessel on the docks which had brought Irish wares, which now, quote, embarked all of Columbanus' effects and his companions. And when with a favourable wind the oarsmen were now rowing the vessel down to the ocean, a huge wave came and drove the vessel back onto the shore. It stuck fast on the land, and the water receding remained quietly in the channel. Well, the bark remained high and dry for 3 days. Then the captain of the vessel understood that he was detained in this manner on account of the man of God, and so decided to disembark from the vessel all that belonged to Columbanus. Immediately a wave came and bore the vessel out to the ocean, close quote. And so, in the chronicler's narrative arc, this is literally the turning of the tide. Columbanus, now convinced that God has overruled Theodoric and Brunhilde's judgment, steps off the Irish ship and heads north to the rival kingdom of Neustria, where he is welcomed with open arms by King Clothar. Next time on Saving Europe, we too head to Paris, where, off the beaten track, we discover the almost forgotten tombs of a Merovingian royal dynasty. We'll also find out about Columbanus' new royal commission to Austria, and we'll visit 2 other later monasteries near Paris that are associated with him. All this and more next time on Saving Europe.
Remember also that this journey was part of the research for a book which uses the lives of Columbanus and Schuman to explore the unlikely arrival, survival, victory and atrophy of European civilization. Do follow the links below to find out more. Please let us know what you thought of this episode, what you liked, what you didn't, what was new to you. Just start a conversation below in the comments section. And of course, if you found the content helpful, then we're pretty sure you're going to like this next one suggested here. But also while you're there, don't forget to help us by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.